Mesdames et messieurs.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this roundtable dedicated to essential key question: can we still support a drop in buying power? Well, after an inflationary shock, the question of buying power is main concern for the French people, for corporations and public decision makers. Growth is slumping in Europe and inequalities are greater. How can we preserve social cohesion, and how can we re-trigger the economic dynamism? What answer to bring to uncertainties? To fuel our reflections, I'm happy to welcome our participants: Valérie RABAULT, former Vice President of the General Assembly and former reporter of the General Assembly, the first woman, Clément EULRY, Director General of Airbnb, Serge MAGDELEINE, Director General of LCL, and Gilles, VAQUÉ, President of BNP Strategy. It's an honor for me to animate this round table along with Pierre from the Cercle des économistes. So before handing the floor to our discussions, we'll hand over the floor to Pierre DOCKÈS, who will shed a macroeconomic light on the dynamics of buying power in France and in Europe. Pierre, the floor is yours. Thank you for giving me the floor. Yes, as you all know, buying power is the first concern of French people. First comment. Second comment, in a question that is addressed this way, well, we can wonder who is us that we need to support, because it's not a unified people or population. It's clear that it's not the same people who benefit from these actual situations we're faced with. So I'll try to develop 4 points very briefly in a nutshell, because we don't have much time. First point is just an observation. First surprise is when you look at the INSEE statistics. The buying power has not dropped in 2021, 2022, up to 24. Yet it increased a little. So some people use this as a pretext to say, well, it's just something that's felt. It's resentment. It's the obligatory expenditures that are felt, as rising. But it's not only that. Remember that buying power is what INSEE calculates. It's an average. And so consequently, in the buying power of the French people, there's the buying power of based on salaries and wages, and the buying power of housing, ownership, and capital. And we see that between 2021 and 2024, the latter have increased sharply, because they took more than 17% over these years. It explains why the buying power seems to have increased. But in reality, I think you have to take wages, salaries. If you consider wages, the buying power based on real salaries, things change, because following the rise in prices that everybody suffered from, the salaries were raised, but less than prices. It's very different. So the salaries were raised, but still less than the situation in 2021 compared to the cost of living. Well, there are salaries vary a lot, of course, but globally salaries dropped. And all indicators, of course, in all surveys show that for lower classes there was quite an important drop compared to the other categories, a drop in their buying power, with situations of people become poorer because of the cost of energy and the cost of foodstuff. And so we had problems with the heating bills, debt, food. We know that a lot of people went to one meal a day. So I don't want to go into that description, which is a tragedy by itself, but that we know quite well. This said, on this buying power that dropped, never forget that in the past years there was the trauma of COVID, and what happened is that for wages it dropped a lot, problem of unemployment, but they caught up to that. But the trauma stayed, and extremely strongly, and one after the other. Well, it makes people feel that they're living through a tragedy. First point. Second point is what will happen in the short term. We run the risk of seeing our buying power drop because of the inflation or because of austerity policies. For the inflation, two things. We'll go back on that for sure. But the first is that there can be exogenous shock due to a war, for example. It's obvious, epidemic or what have you. There can also be more structural type problem. I think that we're still in a situation, in particular in Europe, where there are a lot of savings compared to the investments carried out. So there's a trend to lower the rate of inflation. And then there's the austerity policies. The risk of having such policies is clear. And we talk about that every day. My third point, and the fourth, just to satisfy you, the third point is what are the structural causes in the long term, in long run, and what we should do faced with these structural causes. They're well known, they're real, they're a fact. There's a problem of productivity and distribution of the productivity gains. So it's these two structural issues in the long term. So we need to have a new policy for offer that would have nothing to do with the price competitiveness or salary competitiveness, but which in fact consists in making investments and innovation. And we need a policy that will change the distribution in favor of the labor income, which is much lower than what we should have. And I will conclude here. Okay, thank you, Pierre, for this setting the stage or the scene. And I turn now to Valérie RABAULT. As a former Vice President of the General Assembly, you have a very precious experience of public policies and the stakes of redistribution. According to you, what do we need in terms of social policies to protect the buying power of the French people? It's a presidential program you're asking me to describe. So 2 or 3 points. To react on what you just said, you know that when you're elected, your co-citizens come to see you on different topics, and it's clear that buying power has become the #1 topic, which wasn't the case. It was the case in 2012, 2014, and then there was a drop, and it became again the topic #1 of the concern of our co-citizens. And we look at statistics, 82% of the people say that they were going to do some more savings, otherwise we can't manage to, at the end of the month, to meet our bills. So a lot of people are in the red at the bank. So we learn a lot by looking at bank accounts. But so it's the first topic. Maybe the #1 topic is the worries linked to war, what's happening in the international context. But #1 in France is buying power. Maybe with access to health care being practically at the same level. But is French in a specific situation? Maybe not. There is the Eurobarometer, which is a survey that is launched every 6 months by the European Committee, by the European Commission, with 26,000 people, and we see that France is part of the countries that respond the most. It doesn't mean that the people in other countries don't have problems with buying power, but maybe we're more sensitive to that aspect. When you look at Eurostat data by quintile, we cut up the population in 4 quarters, and we see how things have evolved since the year 2000. We see that the buying power for the first section is the one that has the least progressed compared to other countries. It gives a situation to say that there's a feeling of becoming poorer or losing in buying power in this. And the other problem is the constrained spendings, with our at 26% now, but with situations that vary according to your revenues, your income, that can go up to 40%. So all this lined up, it's quite a difficult cocktail when it comes to the social cohesion, how we consider ourselves and the value we give to our work. If you're in the red at the bank on the 20th of the month, while you're working full time, it means that there is truly a difficulty on the representation of work. So there are structural causes to this, and one that appeared since 2019, that has amplified since 2020, is the drop in productivity in our country. We always said, we always considered France as, we have 35 hours, maybe work less, but we work better. That's what we had in mind, that's what we thought, that we believed. But all this is wrong since 2019. Since 2019, we're in a situation where our productivity drops regularly. And this must be considered very seriously, because it means that in the end, we work, but we don't produce enough. We're not as efficient in our work. And I'm sorry that it's never discussed in the public debate. Productivity is based on, maybe ask you a question, don't you think that, because there's discomfort at work, a lot of French, when they talked about the retirement reform, people said that they were unhappy at work. Doesn't that explain this discomfort, it has to be taken into account. Here in Aix, at the Rencontres économiques, while we can meet the general managers of large corporations, they say, and you, how do you see productivity? And politely, I will not reveal who told me that, but this person said in 2019 we had such a production rate with so many employees, and today we have less productivity and we have more workers. So this is an example. Just do the test. Interview different general managers that are here at the Rencontre. So this should be a collective reflection. It's really, we should address this issue. If we want to take up this challenge of the buying power, well, we need to really have a better mobilization that will involve politics. The second aspect on buying power, when you talk about a drop in buying power, you have a consumption that is dropping. Less imports, okay, that's good for our commercial balance, but as it is in France for the creation of wealth, and it's not the question in Germany, 60% of our wealth is created by consumption, massive figures, 20% by investment and 20% by foreign trade, by exports. That means that if the engine of consumption is hindered, well, our creation of wealth is also hindered. Germany has a different model. 40% of its wealth creation is on consumption, 40% on exports, foreign trade, and 20% on investment. And so you see that we're very closely tied to this question of consumption, including for our production of wealth, which itself means that our GDP can grow, and we have less budgetary efforts. When you have a high GDP, well, you have less budgetary efforts to make. And this aspect must be considered at the micro level. I gave you examples on productivity earlier, but you know that today in France, the fiscal indicator is the reference tax index. It's a reference for the calculating the different, for example, mutualist insurance and all that. But I think today we have to consider what bankers look at closely is what the left to live. When you have people who are in the red, or people who finish the month with 150 euros at the end of the month after paying all the bills, well, there again, it's a difficulty. I think that we need to have a finer means of regulating this. And today we have the means. You can put artificial intelligence to analyze the data. We have a better capacity to have a much better understanding of the situations that what existed in the past. We don't use those tools, and it's quite regretful. And on one important aspect is that when you have a low salary, you can have a bonus. Today you have a threshold effect, and you have people who say, oh, I don't want a wage increase because I lose my housing subsidies and everything, and I lose in buying power. So we have to smoothen all that. We have to, instead of having a clear cut in the offer, I think we have to be smoothen the situation. If you have €1 of subsidy, it shouldn't hinder the other subsidies or allocations that you get. And with the computer tools that we have, it's really possible. I turn now to Clément, Director General of Airbnb. You will share with us your vision of buying power through the prism of tourism and collaborative economy. Please explain how this sector can contribute to support the everyday life of the French people.
Well, the buying power is associated with salaries, of course, and the question really is what's left after all the bills are paid. I think what's important is three things. First of all, let's continue to make it possible for French people to take initiatives, to put in place initiatives, because they want this. The second thing, there are budget items that are so important that people don't want to see them reduced. So, for example, not going on holiday, because for the French, holidays is not just an accessory. And the third aspect associated with having money to live, and this is associated with all French people across all French territories, so that creates social cohesion. So if I develop these questions, it seems really essential to me, and I can see this from the 600,000 hosts that welcome travelers on Airbnb. I think it's important to understand that we've got people here in the room who do this. Hosting is an activity that makes it possible to take initiative, and taking initiative and sometimes causing reducing this possibility to take initiatives is prevents people from moving forward. 92% of properties are rented occasionally, and it helps French people to increase their buying power by up to 4,000 euros a month. So that's like an extra month's salary. So it covers half of what most French people say they're short of. And so it seems important to say that these hosts, 60% of these hosts say they do this in order to pay their monthly budget. So it seems important that buying power is, of course, linked to salaries, but also linked to being able to take initiatives, extra ways of generating income which impact their daily life. If we think about the travelers who are coming to stay with hosts, 40% of the French don't go on holiday. And when we ask French people about the week that they go on holiday, it's a week where they get to breathe, where they get to disconnect from daily life, where life is just going too quickly, where often we're not connected to each other as a family. And the goal is to reconnect with friends and family during this holiday period. And so when people when you ask people about their holidays, when you ask people about their holidays, they say, well, we reconnected during this time. And so in terms of buying power, it's about what we can do with this buying power. And sometimes I think people don't understand how much holidays are important for people in France and for families in France. When we know that 75% of the French are willing to spend less on clothes, for example, or other daily budget items in order to still be able to go on holiday. When I can see that a third of the French say that they go on holiday less than their parents, and it's about 50% in the north of France, 50% of these are also among working classes, 50% of these are women under 35. So we know the importance of reconnecting, making a commitment for holidays that are affordable and open. This seems like absolutely essential, because when we have a kitchen with rooms around it, for example, that makes it possible not to have to go to a restaurant, even if that's a very agreeable thing to do. But it helps us to spend less money. The third point is that this goes beyond families. It's also a territorial question. Of course, when we think that of holidays as a luxury, it's even more the case in rural areas. 8 people out of 10 in rural areas consider that holidays are a luxury. This sense of losing social status, losing class, is linked in to this whole area, and it's important to be able to generate additional income and to make it possible for the French to have a holiday experience somewhere else in France. That's really very important. Here we're talking about affordable tourism, affordable journeys, and I'm really delighted to see that this dynamic of family holidays in rural areas, so away from the coast, this is a really strong focus on this, at least on our platforms. I think that's something that's really fundamental for this link, for this tie that's between us, for the relationships between us. So how can we make it possible for French people to develop their buying power, to continue to be able to take initiatives, go on holidays, stop preventing people, stop putting useless obstacles in the way, because people need to be able to breathe, they need space, and we need to make it possible for the French to breathe. Thank you very much, Clément and EULRY. We're now going to turn to Serge MAGDELEINE, who's the Chief Executive Officer of LCL. As a banker, you can see people's expectations in terms of their incomes and buying power. What do you think you can do to help people preserve their buying power? So the theme of this event this year is about facing the shocks of reality. That means if we're going to do that, we have to put in place solutions that's not just about doing a little bit more and a little bit better. So that means disruptive solutions. So we've heard from Pierre DOCKÈS to solutions about gaining in productivity or better distributing wealth. I think the system is broken and we need to develop a new system. I'll tell you why. Because if we look at the development of production costs, which drives consumption prices, for the last 60 years we've been globalizing. That means we're producing in countries as far as possible in order to have a cost that's as low as possible. In Europe, in Asia, so that makes it possible to reduce production costs and therefore increase consumption. But today we've got an inverse system going on. We are de-globalizing now. So there are 3 reasons we can't continue to globalize, because there are planetary limits. We can't go round the planet twice. We've gone as far as possible. Also, for environmental reasons, it becomes a really terrible thing to get something from elsewhere that we could get from Aix-en-Provence if we in terms of carbon costs, but also for strategic reasons, geopolitical reasons. So we're going towards a de-globalization. And the thinking is as follows. If globalization made it possible to reduce production costs, it's likely that de-globalization will lead to a structural increase in production costs. that's what we call trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. So I think that in the coming years, we are going to have a structural increase in production costs and therefore tension around buying power. And so this system that says, well, we just need to add public spending to help people to spend money, or let's tell businesses to focus on productivity or to reduce their margins, I don't think that's the solution anymore. With LCL, we've just met 10,000 entrepreneurs around France, and I've really been struck by the value of entrepreneurship in France. Just a few figures here. Last year, 1,100,000 businesses were created in France. Nobody's talking about that. That's 4 times the amount of 20 years ago. The added value of these businesses, I'm just talking about micro businesses, self-employed businesses. The added value is 450 billion euros. I'm wondering how we can improve that. And I've got 3 proposals in that area. The first proposal would be an entrepreneurship passport. All young people, when they're 18, they receive a siren number. I suggest that they all receive siren numbers so they can become self-employed. They can work as self-employed. So, of course, not everyone is going to take advantage of this, but it's going to give them opportunity to have their business. The second is a solution of gender equality. Even if we create 1,100,000 businesses in France, 2/3 are created by men, 1/3 by women. Why is that? If we encourage women and we put in place positive discrimination and we come back to equality without impacting the capacity of men to create businesses, if we have a 50%, that would increase. We're seeing an increase of 32% of added value. So that would give us another 150 billion euros of added value. That is 2 percentage points, 2 GDP percentage points in France. And then in terms of buying power for the future, I have been an entrepreneur, and I remember that when I started as an entrepreneur, I was refused a mortgage. So not only I couldn't develop capital for my pension, and I couldn't borrow either. So I suggest we should organize a system, a guarantee system for mortgages for entrepreneurs, which would help them with their buying power at pension. So these are 3 proposals that don't involve redistributing wealth or increasing productivity, but increasing the value in France. Thank you very much. Now let's turn to Gilles VAQUÉ. You support a number of businesses in France and around the world. What can we do to increase growth in this very uncertain field? Well, this is a vast subject, but I think it's very clear in terms of buying power. I don't know if for a lot of the population, even if they're fairly stable, I think a lot of people are struggling, and we need to think about how to redistribute. What I think shocks me is the elephant in the room is that how we can better distribute, or how can we create a better cake. I think we can always be inventive, and I think we need to think actually about the size of the cake. And I think this is something that really shocks me. For the moment, I think we don't really realize in France and in Europe, the world economic market is moving forward. We have this impression that nothing is growing, there's war, etc. But actually today in the world, even the United States have said they're at 33% over the last couple of years. India is at 9%. It's only Europe where we're seeing problems, and in France as well. So following what you were saying, Serge, what we need to do is expand the cake in order to better to distribute it. And that's what interests me. So how long is this going to last? Is there going to be another crisis? But while the worldwide situation is, of course, disrupted, but economically it's good. Of course, it's poorly distributed around the world. That's not what I'm saying. But could we capture some of this and develop the French economy? That's what we're here to talk about for Europe and France. But in France, we have a whole number of different advantages. We have people who are well-trained in areas that are developing for the future. We're good in defense, we're good in energy, we're good on infrastructure. We're a whole number of sectors. We have a whole amount of know-how. So how can we, perhaps like the Germans, perhaps, I don't know if we need to stay at 60% in terms of growth or just expand exports. So if we're talking about that kind of development, then we need to invest in future industry. But we've got no money, so how are we going to do this? So the real question is about how can we develop investment capacities in areas and industries that are going to develop in the future, where we have a lot of opportunities, and France really could do something. And I really believe in the worldwide economic system to distribute this. Of course, we were talking about this in the panel session this morning, but something that we don't work on enough, and investment funds are often seen as the bad guys here in France, but generally in France and in Europe, we don't have any private equity funds. We don't have any capitalization. In the United States, it's 150% of GDP. 35,000 billion is the pension funds of Americans, which is invested all around the world, not just in US. It's in the United Kingdom, it's 100%, and in Europe, it's 32%. So I know that pensions are a big issue. It's very complex, and I'm not saying it's the solution. But if we could do a hybrid solution, if we had a capitalization system which was safe for people who paid back, but I think this would give us a dual effect. It would make it possible to guarantee the pensions of French people. It would also give us investment capacity. We could invest in energy, in defense, in energy, in AI. And I think the capacity that we have, if we could do 100% of our GDP, that would be 290 billion. And so we have the skills. Things are moving forward, and I think we could advance and make progress here. Thank you to all of you for these initial thoughts. Now we're going to open up debate around three key questions going on in society. So first of all, what do we need to learn from the drop-off in buying power, even though Pierre is saying there isn't actually a drop? And then could an austerity policy worsen the situation? And also, do we need to refocus our growth model by focusing on investment rather than consumption? So let's start with that first question. What should we do about the drop-off in buying power?
I feel like saying, you know, the glass half full. I want to talk about all the companies that are able to limit the drop in buying power. Which company played the game, in fact? We're talking about the tariff shield. We're talking about energy companies, Leclerc and all. But the companies that really enabled to maintain the buying power of the French people from 2020 to 2024, it's the banks. Explain why. Who has housing credit? You know, okay, practically half of the people in this room. What is your? How did your monthly payments increase while the interest rates were raised by? Who had an increase in the payback? Well, why nobody? Because the banks absorbed, thanks to the fixed rate model. They absorbed 450 basic points. I calculate that only for LCL, it's 4.5 billion euros per year that we gave back to our clients, like BNP, like Caisse d'Épargne, in terms of buying power. And this is not said enough. The model of the fixed rate property loan is really an important model. Ask our Italian and Spanish colleagues and friends, and they'll tell you how much they suffered. The initiative taken by the French is perceived by the significant increase of the rooms rented through Airbnb. When a teenager leaves home, you know, just to go study somewhere else, we can rent his room through Airbnb. You know, after the COVID, 25 of the rooms rented are done through our Airbnb, just to, of course, to increase one's buying power. A lot of people who are hosts to rent their rooms, often they're retired people, bachelors or something like that. They do that to raise their buying power. You know, it's a way of better using what you own and enabling you to live better. And that's the purpose. You know, we saw a large increase of the rooms rented by individuals, by private owners, in a period of high inflation. So an anecdote I'd like to share with you. I was in an office in New York. We have a seminar in Hudson, in the countryside, the U.S. countryside, and we're there on the night of the election of Trump. Next morning, I took a cab, an hour and a half, and I discussed with the driver to try to better understand why a taxi driver was happy. He had the MAGA cap and everything, why he was happy with Trump. And he said, well, do you understand? You have to understand that we're in an economic crisis. I said, the U.S. in an economic crisis, 3% growth rate, and everything was happening. Well, you saw the inflation. The inflation is double what we had in France. So I chose a candidate that will launch the economy again, increase the incomes. And it's the taxi driver that told us. I don't think we have that mindset in France. It comes from education, it comes from entrepreneurship, it comes from, you know, how we make the cake larger. It comes from a taxi driver. It could be entrepreneur. You know, I was surprised, and that's not the vision we have here. Why Trump was elected, you know, in the U.S. They have a debate on producing at home and everything, creating jobs at home and develop their economy, and they have that in their DNA. And the loss of buying power is different from country to country. And I think, like Serge, there's a lot of energy here. No caricatures here, but the capacity of freeing this and understand that we have to make the cake bigger. It's in everybody's interest. I think it's something that's not sufficiently explained. Yes, Pierre, do you want to add something on this example used by Gilles VAQUÉ? On this question, you know, I think we have to take a more historical position since the middle of the 20th century. We're used to, thanks to growth of the buying power, each generation was better than the previous generation and lived better. And that's a problem that we could consider as really fundamental or essential or philosophical. Well, what's been happening since the end of the 80s is the questioning of this mode of living, historical mode of living, where we could hope, even if we were subject to a difficult period, we could hope that we'd be better for our children in the future, and that's what's being questioned. And it's dramatic, and consequently, if we were to end up with substantial drops and durable and sustainable drops in the buying power, we can be sure that there will be destructuration of society and the resources of the society as such will be questioned. So it's a major change. And I would like to add a point is that, in fact, we had throughout a certain period a rise in the buying power thanks to the drop in prices. And behind that, not a drop in the production costs as such, but thanks to globalization that enabled to buy T-shirts, jeans, what have you, all that coming from China or elsewhere. And this opened the way to maintain or increase the buying power. You must see that people benefited from that. But at the same time, this same phenomenon destructured the production systems of former industrialized countries. And we're in a situation where Europe is losing its last industries, you know, old type industries that it had. Germany, for example, is losing its automobile industry and everything. And it just let all the recent industrial revolutions go by. So it's very important to find another model where we will replace with wages or salary increases. We lost them. We lost it because and we found it. We had it with the drops in prices. But Valérie, I turn to you. I'd like to have your opinion on this aspect. French political women, are they aware today that of the importance of this question of buying power? We're under the impression that it's not really well understood today. And I'm not going to talk for French women, but I think they're aware of that. Are the structural causes well analyzed in the public debate? Go back on what you were saying, both on the fact that we're faced with change in paradigm, very powerful, that is not described as such. Roughly speaking, our economy was based on low cost of capital, very low rates. We know the rates raised since COVID. Labor costs, since we were buying everything from abroad, in Asia, for example. Well, the labor cost was very low, and it was reflected in prices. And the other aspect which is important is the energy costs. The cost of energy, we're protected in France because we have a lot of our energy is produced with nuclear fuel, but we're faced with these three revolutions on the costs and prices that we need to face, and which presupposes that we need to redefine our European production model. I'm sorry, but I think it's important to know if today the political class that is in office, are they aware of that, of the main question that concerns French people? So is the question really well heard by political representatives? But you know, it's good to know that there's a problem. In politics, well, we try to solve problems, find solutions. But is there a consensus on the causes? I don't believe that. There's not enough debate. Also, the different political options that exist. Highlighted three problems. Are these problems addressed? Are there options, solutions? You know, no, because you look at the political programs; they're empty. We're not facing the world as it's transforming itself with a real good sense of awareness of what's happening. We can say Europe. I have faith in Europe. Europe was built from the Second World War by organizing its internal market, and so it's the competition that took the lead in Europe, trying to lower the prices, even if it meant to the expense of our own production means. And what's happening in the U.S. and in Asia, we have to reorganize our relationship with the rest of the world through trade and through what we can produce in our countries, on the European continent. So these are major changes, as if you took in the 70s, for example, 1970s, when there was the oil shock and everything, which they decided to change our way of producing electricity. It was the shock that's at that level. Important decisions need to be taken, but are not part of the public debate, I must admit. Another question, talking about the austerity policy, 40 billion euros savings for the fall budget. And will that make the situation even worse? Who would like to Serge, yes, I think what will make the situation worse is not to do savings plans. What we call austerity, I call that reality. It's a reality. Can a household spend more than what it earns? Can a company spend more than its income? No, it can't. I see Pierre who doesn't agree with this, but in the end, well, the state is exactly the same thing. And I think, in fact, we will not steer clear from a savings economy. But we will have to do that by selecting the economies in the light of the impact it will have on the buying power, trying to minimize this impact on the buying power, notably over the less favored social classes. Very important. Otherwise, we're on the risk of really suffering. And what we seldom do is to evaluate the positive impact of these savings, as we do in corporations and in businesses. Yes, I think I agree. The question we have is short-term versus long-term. Economists seem to be quite unanimous when it comes to austerity policies, with the deglobalization, defense, and everything. You know, but we know we have to make efforts, and these efforts can pay in the long run. And pay back, and the capacity that we have of making efforts that are bearable, so that tomorrow we can have a better world for our children. Go back on what Pierre was saying. I don't know if collectively, in the debate, in the public debate, in the media, for example, are we ready for that? I don't think we're mature enough for that.
Do either of you want to reply to that question?
7 minutes.
Micro for Clément. Microphone for Clément. So, in terms of the question, I don't know what the government's going to put in the 40 billion that's been announced in the press. In order to give you an order of magnitude, the public deficit that we have, if we look at a household with 2 children, it's as if you were ending the month every month with an overdraft of 547 euros, and that's tricky, but that is the reality. So of course things can't continue in that way. So the state can't be compared to a household, of course, because it's not the same situation. But the order of magnitude, if we imagined all of us, if we every month had an overdraft of between 130 and 530 euros, that's what the public deficit is like. So there's a question about the management of the public budget, which cannot continue forever as it is now. In a finance law, there's always an introductory article which no one reads, but it gives the general balance. And there were always two members of the National Assembly who put in place amendments, or perhaps there were 3 of them actually. I can see someone else here, and we put a few amendments in place, and it lasted just 10 minutes of debate, and after that we had 1,600 billion euros that were approved just after this small debate. So I think we need to change this. I think we need to have a real debate on public finances. We need to have this debate. I know that no one's really interested, but if we don't have this debate, we're going to end up, I've heard so many people say so often, we're going to have to just cut some things here and there. That's not a policy. We're going to have to target some things really clear, and we can only really do that with around a question of justice. We can't allow some people to continue to make amazing profits, or different areas that that are progressing in particular ways. That's really essential. Thank you very much. Our last question, just very quickly, because I want to hear questions in the room. So, in a word, should we build our growth model on consumption or on production? That's going to be very difficult in 2 words, but we're going to have to focus on consumption and also investment. We're going to have to focus on investment. So beyond the budget for 2026, which is going to be a challenge, I think we need a France 2030 business plan. How are we going to create added value? What are we going to renounce, and how are we going to make sure that the services of the state, the general organization and fiscality aligns with these advantages? Yes. I would also share this last point, because tourism is brings added value over the long term, and it is an activity that cannot be delocalized. And the other point would be reinvestment, how we use what is existing at this time. There's a kind of circular economy about making other people benefit from what we have now. Well, it's always really difficult to do this in just 2 words. Very briefly, the state and the households are very different in terms of debt. You said this, of course, but your argument presented it as if it was the same thing. No, the debt of the state and the debt of a household is not the same thing at all, and all economists of all kinds are in total agreement here. What I would just add as an argument is that there is a danger if we put in place an austerity policy today in terms of buying power. There is the risk, a social and political risk, because what you are going to bring in with this kind of strategy, these are deflationary strategies, that is going to lead to the rise of the extremes. And very simply, that's going to mean that in the presidential election, we will just have Le Pen against Mélenchon because of this. So think about social and political consequences before talking about debt. Thank you very much, Pierre. Are there any questions in the room? 2 minutes left, so thank you.
So, Pierre Meroli, I'm unemployed. I'm under the impression that in the French politics, because buying power is the first topic in France, we play to who has the best rule of 3. It's a debate of parameters, but we forget what's at the front of the schools of freedom, equality, and fraternity, which mobilize the nation, the collectivity, to build a state that's not the same as a household. If we abandon the level of vision we're talking about here to discuss on parametrics, so we're all heading for the wall. So what is your question? My question is why have we forgotten what is the value of France? Why did we forget freedom, equality, and fraternity? Who wants to answer this? Valérie, I will answer, because I wrote a book saying that the economic model is freedom, equality, and fraternity. Freedom is the risk-taking process, long-term investments by the state and the short-term the private sector. Equality is an important education system. Fraternity is being open to the others with shared public services, and the European politics that are open. I can give you the work I did. It's the France 2040 business plan. But it's the French model still that we need to defend. That is, that's the motto. It's on at the basis of our French economic model. Thank you, Valérie, RABAULT. Thank you all This debate showed the complexity of the topic. Buying power is not just a question of figures. It's a question of perception, opportunity, and trust in the future. Thank you all. Good evening. Have a good evening.